So tonight we're looking at this using OAuth with APIs lab. And we'll step through it. As we go through this, if you have any questions, comments, anything, throw it out into the chat window or just shout it out over the microphone. Either way works. I do have multiple monitors and the chat's on the one that you're not seeing. So if I don't respond right away, I probably just haven't looked over at it. I just kind of get zoned in. So I'm not ignoring you. I just might not see it. I'll get to it. I promise you though. So yeah. So API user authentication. So is there anything up here? Oh. Until now, we've been authenticating to APIs at the application level using the client ID and secret. And it's important that we do this application authentication because it allows the API provider to ensure good behavior between a client and application. And application level authentication gives us access to application level functions, for instance, the venue search and what we've been building to this point in Flatiron. However, this only gives us access to like the nothing user specific. So this documentation has actually changed, I believe, but if we go here, we see user or userless authentication. So we can get this information without a user authentication. Now, if we want to get a list of somebody's friends on Foursquare, it requires user authentication. So that's where our OAuth is going to come in. We are going to authenticate our user to Foursquare through our application. And we're going to tell Foursquare, or we're going to allow our users to tell Foursquare, hey, I trust this application, give it this stuff of mine to use. And we're going to write some code that'll log in on the behalf of the user. Well, we're not going to write code that is going to require us to ask the user for their Foursquare login credentials, because that would, one, probably make users not feel comfortable, but two, be hard to maintain. That person, if our users change their password on Foursquare, then they have to change a password on our platform. And that isn't very efficient. And then, yeah, the security issues of if we were going to send the user's password to Foursquare every time we need to get info from Foursquare, then we would have to store it unencrypted in our database. And we definitely don't want to store passwords unencrypted in our database, especially for things, for other sites that our users use. So this is where we get OAuth. Now, OAuth allows us to authenticate people without them entering the usernames, passwords into our application. So it's a way for one application to authenticate to another on behalf of a user, and it's by the means of a revocable, expirable token. So if our application has a Foursquare token for the user and someone gets access to our database of tokens, all of them can be revoked and the hacker gets nothing about our users and doesn't get their, well, if they're in our database, they probably get something about our users, but they don't get anything about our users' credentials for Foursquare. An OAuth token also provides a standard way for applications to tell Foursquare that, you know, hey, this user says we can do things for them. Because part of the OAuth implementation is requiring the user to explicitly authorize us for what we want, what they want us to be allowed to do with their Foursquare stuff. So the way OAuth works is there's 3 steps at a high level. We request access from the provider site. So that is, you know, you click a link and you're taken to, let's say, you know, we're on Learn. We click a link and we're taken to Foursquare. And, you know, it says, hey, do you allow this person? And you click allow. It typically has some information about what's going to be shared. And that the person says, okay, and it gets sent back to our site with a code. Then our site immediately takes the code that was just sent to us and sends it back to the provider, Foursquare in this case. And then Foursquare gets that same exact code back almost instantaneously, and then they send us back the token. And I think that's part that people miss sometimes, is that there's a back and forth twice. Somebody's on our site, they typically click a button, they go to the other site, they authorize, and then that site sends our site a code, and we send that code immediately back, and then that site sends us the token. And the point of this is that because of that back and forth in the middle, that happens so fast and so quickly that it's pretty much impossible to intercept, because it's going to also, that code has an expire on it that's extremely short. So there's not going to be enough time for somebody sitting in the middle to intercept that code, send it back, spoof that it's coming from us and do everything that it needs to, and send it back with our information to the server to get the token that we're supposed to get, our site is supposed to get. It makes it extremely hard and difficult, and makes it very secure in this instance. So now let's jump into the code some and see how we do this. Oh, what am I missing? Probably app bin config. Do you live on? Oh, there aren't tests in this. So let's walk through this. Where are we at? No. Too many windows. Here. So the first thing we want to do is figure out if a user has already authenticated to Foursquare in this session. So I guess I can pull this to the side. We can do it this way if we have enough space. That works. Let's run our server. Cool. Okay. Application controller. So ultimately, we're going to consider users logged in, quote unquote, if they have an access token stored in their session. So we're going to create a private method called logged in our application controller. And that will return false if the session token is nil. Now we start working on our process of setting up our authentication. So the first step in OAuth flow is to direct users to Foursquare to request access. Now, according to the docs, user authentication for web applications goes to somewhere like this. I thought I was logged in. Here. Okay. And it has the flow for us. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So direct users to Foursquare with your registered redirect URI. So let's grab this link. So part of the URL includes the redirect URI parameter. So we'll need to set that up. So let's create our Foursquare app. Create a new app. Flatiron. Sure. And I'll set localhost 3000 for our URL. The robot. I have to click pictures. Yes. Storefront. Storefront. Okay. Sandbox because it's free. And I will delete this app as soon as the lecture is over so people can't get to my stuff. But redirect URIs. So we're going to set that to localhost 3000/auth. Save changes. Okay. So we need a .env file here. Now what a .env file does is it allows us to use our client ID and secret. It's kind of like it is a way to hold a variable. However, the variable isn't being held, it's being held in a different place. Like it's not going to be, it's only going to be written from the server. So it's not going to be in the actual code. And that's going to help us because we don't want our client IDs and secrets out there in version control and such, because it's out there. People people don't have a tendency, people do abuse them. They'll find other people's codes and use them for nefarious things. The most, I guess, sad stories are when people put their AWS secret keys up on GitHub by accident, and people take those and they use them and they create servers with them, and people don't realize it until a month passes and they get, 5-6 digit Amazon Web Services bills. And typically Amazon will reduce those, but they won't erase them. So keep your client IDs and secrets secret. And the way we do this is through, I don't think it's in here. Let's see, the .env gem. So .env, add this line to the top of your application gem file. .env and the pattern of the .env file is consistent across programming languages. So let's get this installed. Touch.env to create the file. Start the server back up. So having a .env file in the root of the project directory is going to be something that's standard. Obviously, if you're not writing Ruby, if you're writing JavaScript or something else, there isn't going to be a .env gem that you use, but some other sort of package will do the same sort of thing. And it is always good to make sure that your .env is in your git ignore. Or if you're using a different version control system, it's in the appropriate git ignore. We don't want this going up to version control. Now, in this .env, we can set up our environment variables. Now, that's what the env is short for, environment. So we'll set Foursquare client secret. And we can set those up to these. One thing I always forget is if these need to be strings or not, but I believe it's just right on, like that. Okay. Now we can use this env bracket for our environment variables throughout our application. Also, if for some reason we need to change one, we can change it in one spot. All right, so now our first request should be ready to rock. Let's go back to our application controller and set up another private method, our authenticate user method. I'm going to copy and paste this, but we'll step through it. And make it a before action. Okay. So what's going on here? We're setting a client ID to our environment variable for the client ID. We're setting a redirect URI to the CGI.escape. Which I'm not a class, CGI in Ruby. CGI escape is coming from the CGI spec. Okay, I was thinking back to like CGI bin. I was like, that's not what this is doing. Which describes how data should be encoded, decoded between web server and application. And it looks like it is a more specific use case for that. The Ruby community used URI escape for years. The problem with URI escape was that it could not handle the RFC 3896 spec. So we're going to CGI escape it. And then we set the Foursquare URL, and we use string interpolation for the client ID, redirect URI, and then we say we're going to redirect to the Foursquare URL unless someone's logged in. So we're basically going to call this method when somebody clicks, log in with Foursquare link, and if they're logged in already, we're going to do one thing. We're not going to do anything. Otherwise, we're going to send them to the Foursquare URL. So once you've implemented, set the authentication as a before action. In your sessions controller, we want to skip the before action. Because we set that in our application controller, all these are inheriting from our application controller. Skip the before action, authenticate user only create. So now, whenever users do not have an access token stored in their session, they will be redirected to the Foursquare authorization URL. So we started our Rails server, although I think I need to restart it because we changed environment variables. Do that just in case. We can go to our app, /search. And here we are at Foursquare. You see Flatiron Lecture, website, it's taking us back to our website. So now we're getting to the application. And this is that URL that we set up. If we take this and look at it, we'll see. It's that same exact URL that we just built. So when we hit allow, okay, we get an error. That's good. We're working so far, and that's what we're doing. We're implementing step by step, going through this. So Foursquare is redirecting back to our URL that we gave them with the code. So now we have to take that and handle it. So let's set that up in our routes. So config routes. We need our get, because it is a get request, auth. We're going to send that to our sessions, create route action, and our sessions controller. So now let's do our create action. Will that be like that? Okay, so now we have to go back. So they're redirected with the code. We get our code as a param. We see here a question mark code. So the code params is going to have the code. And then we have to send it back. Send the code back. So we're going to use Faraday, which is a gem, to send this request in our controller action. Faraday makes it easier to send HTTP requests exactly as we need, and it also allows us to handle the responses. I'm going to double check that Faraday is here and install. You can read up all about Faraday on their documentation, but it's very powerful. It can also be used, well, it is being used here to interact with APIs. I honestly don't know where everybody is in the curriculum, but if you were all the way back doing your CLI gem project, you could use Faraday in that to interact with an API to get data and handle the responses. So we're going to...
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've noticed it's actually from certain documentation tough to figure out what the parameters that are required, and the URL that is used to pass those parameters in. So is the standard the question mark and then the parameter equals and then your unique parameter? Is that, because I noticed on the GitHub one, it wasn't like as clear as the Foursquare. So
Yes.
I'm curious, like, what's the syntax that people prefer and like what you're likely to see?
Yeah, so passing parameters is always going to start with that question mark.
Yeah.
And then after that, we have these ands.
Okay.
And that's going to be each additional parameter. So depending on how they want things structured, it might not be as clear as this.
Mm-hmm.
But we can look at that also. Actually, it's what is it? API.github.
Yeah. Well, just knowing the and is the ampersand is like really, I didn't know that was a thing.
API version 3. So yeah, this is saying, we're looking at the name is going to be like the left side of that equals,
Mm-hmm.
and then It's going to be a string. Let's find. These are just listing things. So it looks like GitHub, most of the stuff is actually separated by slashes. Oh, parameters. So yeah, here you would want a title. So you would have you'd have your post with these filled in, and then a question mark, title equals, and then the title.
Yeah.
And then you could put, the ampersand body equals, or assignee equals, etc.
Got it.
And those are also great things to play around with in Postman and stuff, just throwing queries at an API, seeing what it gives you back, playing with these things.
Sure. Cool.
So let's set up our Faraday. We're going to pass in all of our params here. So this is like just telling it, we're going to call this our response, because Faraday is going to do a GET request and take what it gets and output it and return it. So that's going to come into our response, because it's actually going to be what we get back from this GET request when we send it all this information. So this is, so going here to the access token, and then we're plugging in some things into our params, the request parameters, and Faraday's doing that work for us. We're then going to take the body of that response, or we're going to get the body of that response by parsing the JSON of it. So it's going to come back to us in JSON. The response is body. And we're going to parse that to get it out of JSON. And then we're going to take the token from that body, which is now parsed in a format that we can work with in Ruby, and set our token for the session. And then we're going to redirect back to the root of our application. Okay. Now we should be able to walk through our authentication steps. We go back. Let's refresh this. Because we have that before action, we're getting redirected. And now when we hit allow, we end up back at our root path. We've authenticated, we have set a session token, and we are at the root of our application. So now we want to use our access token to get some stuff from the API. So looking back at the Foursquare documentation, we don't want that. Let's see. Authentication. We want, let's see, what were we looking for? Oh, friends. So as long as we make requests to endpoints, including, where is it at on this page? There's on this page. User authentication. Oh, these are good examples. I know they changed this stuff, but let's see. Now the users have their API tokens, they can make calls to all the API endpoints as long as those tokens are included in the request. Back in our Foursquare auth docs under request section. Let's see, requests. access token. Once you have an access token, you can use any endpoints by just adding OAuth access token equals the access token you have to your GET or POST request. So, for example, that's where it is. Okay. So now with any of our requests, we just tack on this extra param of an OAuth access token. And Foursquare requires that you put this version, this V on there. It's just part of their stuff for whatever reason. So back to our friends documentation. First, let's add a route to friends, for friends, to friends. So config routes. All right, there we go. So we can search for friends. And then let's go to our searches controller. We have our search function. Or that's not what we're looking at. And we just set up the friends route, so we want to handle that now. So once again, our response is going to be a GET. And we're going to have two params, the OAuth token, which is going to be the session token, and that V. Yeah, don't forget that pesky V param for versioning. And then we're going to set our friends based on the structure of what Foursquare sends back to us, which they don't have an example of. The requests are pretty straightforward, but they don't show examples of the responses, which is kind of a bummer. But that's something that you could play around with, like I was saying before, in something like Postman, and see what the responses look like. So you know exactly how you want to parse the body of that response. Or play around with it in Pry, which I think we can do here. Make sure we're set up for that. No, by bug. When we hit that, we can look at it, see what it's giving back to us. Like many API providers, Foursquare gives you a way to try API calls. Yeah, they've changed that. I thought that was not working anymore. I should go back, knowing that I know a couple of these things don't work, I should probably go back and submit some edits to this lesson. Okay, finally, let's set up a review. This is going to have a statement where if the size is greater than 0, we're going to list all the friends. Else, we're going to say, it looks like you don't have any Foursquare friends yet, which is what I believe it's going to be, because I'm pretty sure I don't have any Foursquare friends. Because I honestly don't know anyone who uses Foursquare anymore. Searches friends.html, .erb. Cool. All right. Let's open this up because we should hit it on bybug. Now load friends, and just like that, they'll be there for you. Okay. So let's see what our response looks like. So this is what our response looks like. And it is a large object, but it is the Faraday response. And let's look at our body. So here is what's coming through as a response from, or the body of the response. So it's still more than we want to really mess with. So when we parse that, because this is JSON, we see we get something much more usable, looking, like nested Ruby hash, JSON parse. If we look inside of here, we have this response. Then inside of there, we have friends. Then inside of there, we have items, which would be an array of our friends, if we had any, or if I had any, I guess, on Foursquare. Empty array. So that kept running, and our view should be showing. Oh, maybe we messed it up. Okay, without bug, looks like you don't have any Foursquare friends yet. So we've gone through getting our secret and our client ID, implementing it with a .env file, and how we can use those throughout our application. Remembering to put them in the git ignore, so we do not upload them to GitHub and such. The flow of authorization with an API, OAuth, how it's going back and forth. It's not just going once and then coming back, although it appears that way to an end user. And a little bit about how the Faraday gem can help us make requests and deal with responses. So that's the end of the OAuth and APIs lab. Any questions, comments that I can answer? And the Foursquare API is very friendly. It's very straightforward. Setting up the application is very easy. But like was being said earlier, depending on the documentation, it can be a little harder to parse. You might need to shoot things at the API and get responses back. If you don't have it, Postman is the jam. Use it all the time when I'm working with new APIs. I think they deprecated their Chrome extension. So you have to get a desktop application now. Yep. But it is a great tool and worth it.
Hey, Seth, this is Brad. I got a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it enough to just use a .env file and put it in your git ignore? Well, in other words, is there some other reason that we need a .env gem beyond just using git ignore?
Yes. So what is actually happening is that is being loaded to the environment of the terminal every time the server is started. So if we look a little bit deeper at that .env gem. It's storing configuration in the environment. So it's actually in the environment that the server is running in. So the only way to access those environment variables is going to be from the server. So I'm trying to remember how.
So that's like if I'm going to deploy my app to Heroku and all I'm using is .env with git ignore, it won't make it, Heroku won't be able to use it safely if I don't use this, use a gem?
Well, Heroku won't even get your .env file.
Right.
So you're going to have to set your environment variables on Heroku.
Right. I think I did that with
So,
my API URLs, but I didn't put any secrets there. It was just,
yeah.
okay.
So whatever it is that you're using, I think,
Yeah, I guess it's not I'm not making a good apples to apples comparison because I'm just talking about an API to my own data. I'm not reaching out anywhere else, so I haven't really exposed myself to any risk because I'm not using a key API key, to reach out anywhere yet.
so these variables are what's going to need to change.
Hmm.
I honestly don't remember what this is, so I don't have any.
I knew there had to be a reason, though.
But yeah,
Yes, I'm gonna check into that.
but yeah, that's where you set those environment variables
Yeah,
here, these config variables, the key and value, and
yeah.
those will be loaded just for that server as they run, and the server is going to have access to them in the environment. So the environment being, what that shell that the server is running in, not the code, not anything else, but just there, and that's where it's reading it from. So it's kind of like, haven't delved deep enough into it to understand environment variables, but I think it's kind of like storing them in the memory while the server is running. So like when the server shut down, they disappear too. They're ephemeral. So it helps in a security aspect on that sense. Obviously, they're always going to be somewhere stored. Like they'll be here on Heroku. So if somebody gets access to your Heroku account, they can get them, and they're going to be on your local machine in plain text, in that .env file. But it's more secure because it's not in your code. So if somebody inspects your code, they can't get to it either.
Okay. Well, yeah, and actually, I've a couple of times inadvertently sent keys up to GitHub, and you get a nice little email saying, "Hey, you might want to get this out of here."
Yeah, a lot of them have been getting better about warning people about that. But even because of what version control is, it's almost impossible to delete something from it. So I just have to. I mean, a couple of times I've done it, I've just had to nuke the project and re-upload it.
Yeah, that's what I do. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, man.
You're welcome. Let's see. Does devise hide the key when you use OmniAuth through it? I don't believe you're using your secret key in devise, but let's see. Platform, right? Devise. Wiki. OAuth. Oh. Auth. I spelled it right. Let's look at this. Has devise in it. I don't believe so. Here somewhere. Configuration for any authentication mechanism. If I can find it. Actually, I know where I can look as a reminder. I'll look at my browse project. So we can look in the device. Config. I think it's in here. Yeah, it doesn't. See, I have my environment Facebook app ID, Facebook app secret. So you'll still want to have that .env file is going to be, you know, the single source for all of those things, and you might have 20 keys in it, but that's where it's pretty standard to have just that one file with those environment variables in it, and to keep all your stuff in there, and then just using these variables throughout your applications. Cool, good questions. Anything else? You're welcome.